Now, I was talking about heart rate variability, and the question that prompted me looking down this path was that there's a correlation between heart rate variability and willpower. And as heart rate variability increases, you have more willpower. Now, the thing with willpower, as I said, is you have to account for I don't want power. So once you take care of the I don't want power, you have the willpower, and that I don't want power is a conditioned response. So we could reduce that. And then you have the willpower, and even without the I don't want power, willpower wanes throughout the day. It wanes with decision making. Essentially, it wanes with use. So the more you use the willpower, the more you make decisions, the more you're in, the more you're engaging the willpower, the faster it's going to be reduced. And to understand that, to understand that, why that applies with heart rate variability, let's take a look. So when you have heart rate variability, when heart rate variability is high, the spaces between the beats are changing more than when heart rate variability is low. So if you're calm in a meditative state, your body is not in urgency mode. It's not in fight or flight mode. It's not in stress mode. So the beats of the heart can be more relaxed. Now this is measured obviously in milliseconds, thousandths of a second. But the more variability you have, the more willpower you're going to have, because the less you're getting into fight or flight. Is a layman's way of saying it. I read the book Heart Math Solution back in 2018, and it was one of those books that it was dense. It took a lot to get your head wrapped around. But just check it out, Heart Math Institute. They do all this work and they show where the heart. They talk about it as the heart having a mind, but you can just look at what's going on with the heart and what's going on with your physiology, what's going on with your breathing, and you start to see these connections. So heart rate variability and willpower, you can look at it like this. When you are under stress, when you're calm, we have coherence. When you have coherence, your chaos is lower. And you've seen people who are very dysregulated, they're stressed out, they're going through whatever, and you can see that they need to regulate. But it's very difficult to get to regulation when you're in that state. The person who's being triggered would not have a high heart rate variability. This over here, this area to the side here, we're going to call that, on this side, chaos, and on this side, rigidity. The more coherence you have, and let's call this whole thing the system. So the more coherence you have, the less chaos and rigidity you're going to have. Now you want some, because you want to be able to respond. You want to be able to be flexible and adjust. And you also want to stay true to your agency. So we need enough rigidity. But when you have a person saying nothing works, it can't work, I've tried it before, I've tried everything, I can't do it, I'm not going to do that, there's more rigidity, and that rigidity impacts a person's accomplishment, achievement, present moment. When you have low coherence, when you have low coherence, you have much more rigidity, much more chaos, and much more rigidity. So all of this noise out here, and because neurons that fire together wire together, and the ones that wire together fire together. So you just have this scaling up, and this is what that anxiety spiral feels like. And you feel like it's closing in on you. It is, right? So the whole system, you only have so much bandwidth. And if the bandwidth is being taken up by rigidity and chaos, you have less availability to deal with your quest, to go for your purpose, to give into that powerful present moment. And that's why your coherence goes very low. So here we have low coherence. Now, this is physiological. This is not mental. The reason why I say that the majority of your cognitive processing is physiological, not mental, is because 95% of everything we do is done by habits, and habits live in the network of neurons. And cognitive processing, the same way that you can look at artificial intelligence when you put in a prompt, it's processing. What it's doing is it's matching up associations. It's connecting associations with other things, which is why artificial intelligence doesn't do a good job of going broadly. It goes deep because it's all about associations. But when you push it to go broadly, it doesn't know where to go. It's confused because there are no associations. But if you ask it, relate this to this, then it's brilliant. It can go in and it can relate and it can map and it can look at this and it can look at that. It becomes brilliant. So artificial intelligence by itself lacks that ability to create or develop or design in the field of infinite possibility. But with a human operator, AI can do great things. And I think this is why people get confused. They think AI is smart because of how fast it can process. But it's just associations. And when you consider that the network of neurons, humans, processes at 11 million bits per second, now you can see the parallel to when you put in a prompt and by the time you click enter, artificial intelligence is already answering it. It's very, very similar. That's why I say the majority of cognitive processing is physiological. Now, while I'm on that topic, here's my picture. Let's say we have an average person and we have the (95%) habit patterns, thought. And people have to remember that habits are not just actions, it's habits of thought, it's thought patterns, it's speaking patterns, everything. These neurons affect everything. 100 billion of them, and you don't have to know the basal ganglia or the prefrontal cortex or the amygdala or the hippocampus because neurons behave very similarly for this conversation regardless of where they are. So the amygdala is neurons, the basal ganglia is neurons, etc., etc. So once you understand neurons and you look at it that way, it starts to make sense. And then we have this part over here, which is the conscious. 5% conscious. And using that other math or that other slide, let's say that this is the 33,000 stimulus response cycles per day. What I would say happens as you go through this work and you get a handle on it, you go through the step 1, step 2, you're changing step 3, you're getting back to a powerful present moment in step 7, you're doing the emotional modulation. And I don't have the research to back up what I'm saying now, but my sense, because I don't think that I'm changing the percentage of my life that's run by habit. I still want 90 to 95% of my life run by habit, because it's the network of neurons is so much faster, 11 million bits per second, and it has access to my entire database. Why would I want to cut that off? I don't. But what I do think happens is this becomes more focused on the internal stimuli instead of the external stimuli is number one. And I believe this number, I may be down, if not lower, than 10,000 stimulus response cycles a day, probably much lower. I don't engage. I just don't engage with a lot of the stimuli that come across my reference because I know that they're not tied to my goals. So if you take, this is average. This is next level. I'll just call it that for short. Now, if you look at the internal stimuli, versus the external stimuli, I would say that the average person is probably something like this, and with the external being like this. So my objective, whether this is what's really going on or not, this is my objective. With myself, with clients, I want this to be larger, and the external, depending on the situation, it might be very small, or if I'm selling and I need to read signals, maybe it's a little bit bigger. If I'm leading, depends on if I'm in an operational environment, I want less coming from the external. If I'm in a project environment and I'm creating, I want more coming from the external. So this might flex, but I'm in charge of it. So this is agency. This is where we're going. So I do think in the process that the number of stimulus response cycles reduce. And let me talk about that. So if you look it up, you'll see that we are hit with about 5,000 to 10,000 ad stimuli per day. You probably cannot come up with 100 ads that you saw yesterday. So where are they all going? They're happening in the 11 million bits per second. The reticular activating system is only letting a few of them through. And the few that come through are what you actually see. So although there's 33,000 stimulus response cycles per day, that's at the unconscious level, obviously, only a few of them are coming through. I would say that as you lean into this agency model and you're in charge, then what happens, you will see less of that 10,000. So if 10,000 cross your field of view or come through your reference, you're going to see a much smaller portion of them. But I would argue that because you are then tuned to your internal stimuli, you just don't see them. Literally, you just don't see them. This is why you have fewer and fewer needs for emotional modulation. It's why you have fewer and fewer instances of being triggered. But it doesn't matter because you're not going to be triggered anyway because you have these conditioned, the positivity exercises conditioned in, and you can find these on the 7stepreset.com/live. Past videos. I do this. I talk about these every day, and I do a different step, focus on a different step every day. Now, I want to go through and look at some of the areas that probably make sense to you. So, the first one is emotional availability. Emotion is energy in motion. It's easy for people to think that emotion is, you can think, let me back up. Energy in motion, there's clearly a mental energy component of it, but there's also a physiological component of it if you allow it. So if I ask a person, where's that emotion? They can point to their body and tell me where the emotion is, because it gets lodged into the network of neurons. Energy emotion is supposed to pass through within 90 seconds. When you're modulating it, it just passes through. When you suppress it, when you dwell on it, when you harbor it, when you allow it to associate with other neurons and neural pathways, then it gets locked in, and now it's becoming a neurological event, neurobiological event. So there are uncomfortable emotions, and then there are empowering emotions. I don't want to say bad emotions because emotion is a signal. It's a signal to tell you you need to pay attention over here, you need to pay attention over there. So we want to talk about emotional availability different. But everyone has experienced or would know what I'm saying is if I say, put your game face on. You need your game face, or he or she had the game face on. We also know, like I said, when somebody's saying, I've tried everything, or it's not going to do that, that's not going to happen, right? That's the I don't want power. Another one is the when I talk to a client and they say, this is what I want in my 10-year plan or my 5-year plan, that is the you that I'm talking to, or them. That's the you versus the body. The point I'm making here by laying this out is when you are stressed, you have less ability to put on a game face. You're going to see more of the I don't want power, and you're going to see more of the body versus the you. Now, let me push on that a little bit. If I talk to a client and I'm asking them, what do you want? And I go through the 7 levels deep. Why do you want that? And how is that important to you? And what will you have when you get that? And have you tried this before? When I go my 7 levels deep, I'm 100% in their conscious mind. And you can see it when it happens. You can see when they cross from the pad answers into the conscious. And then I calibrate that, I lock that in, and I know what they want. I'll make notes, I'll remind them of it. But then when we get into topics that things are tough and I'm pushing them and they're getting uncomfortable, they're bumping into their stories, the cognitive dissonance, then you see the body come out. And now it's, I can't do that. No, it's not happening. And I'll back off. I'll back off because I don't want that to become a neurobiological event. I'm essentially doing the emotional modulation for them. I move on and let that emotion process, and it doesn't lock in. But if I keep pushing on it, and this is why leadership is such an important understanding for leaders, because when you see that happening, you want to back off. You don't want to push through it. So that's the emotional availability. I already talked about coherence, and so there is a heart-brain connection. And I'll just say coherence because we already talked about it. And you know that you are better able to deal with incoming stimulus when you are coherent. You're more likely to have a good response for your significant other when you're coherent. And there's a relativity to HRV, and I'll also say beta brainwave. So I'll sometimes say that leaders can understand where people are with respect to HRV and the beta brainwave. It's not like they're going to have people wired and measured up and see their number. But I 100% tell you that once you start understanding this, especially in yourself, you'll see it in other people. The signals that somebody's starting to move into incoherence happen so much sooner than it actually is. And one of the reasons I talked about it yesterday, priming actually occurs before the stimulus because there's a look forward or look back, I guess I would say. And that point in time, those milliseconds that are picked up for the stimulus, you can see how is this person primed. If they're already primed and they're in high beta brainwave state, I know that bringing up a touchy subject is probably not a good idea. There have been times where I've just shut down the conversation with clients and say, we're not going to talk about it now. Let's talk about this other thing over here because they're in such a high beta brainwave state. We can't do it. Sometimes I'll go convergent thinking and then divergent, right? You go back out. You want to go up a level. You go up a few levels and work on something else that's a much higher level. But generally speaking, you can look at energy and uh, going down, right, when those beta brainwave levels are high. We want to get them in a lower, you're not maybe not going to get them to a alpha state, but you get them to a lower level or a lower amplitude brainwave. And we have signal strength and quality. So what I'm talking about here is neural pathway. Backdrop is we have 100 billion neurons. Each neuron is connected with anywhere from 1,000 to 10,000 other neurons, probably more. So there's trillions of connections, and the neurons that fire together wire together, but also the ones that wire together fire together. So this is why you can have shallow breathing occur from being anxious, and you can create anxiety by going into shallow breathing. Now, signal strength, this is neurotransmitter. You need neurotransmitter to have a strong signal strength. The good way to understand this is looking at muscle. As we get older, especially after 60, the neural pathway signal is so weak, it's very difficult to push the muscle to failure. So you will hit failure, but it's the neural pathway failing, not the muscle. So you're not tearing the muscle, which is why the muscle doesn't get stronger. Neurotransmitter is one thing, the muscle is another, and when a person has atrophy, they're both going down. But here's the thing. The neural pathway is remains strong, i.e. the neurons are wrapped with myelin, but the synapse goes away. There's a thing called synaptogenesis, and the synapses moves or is pruned from the inactive neural pathways to the active ones. This is why at the beginning of a season for a sport, you feel awkward the first day, maybe the second day, and by the third day, you're back in stride. The muscle was there. It's just that the neural pathways didn't have the synapse, and so you need the excess neurotransmitter to move in and fill out those neural pathways. This is why if you go to a physical therapist, they talk about we want to activate the stabilizer muscles. It's not really the muscle that's getting stronger with those little baby exercises. It's the neural pathways that are getting neurotransmitter put in there, which is why they have you doing slow and deliberately and paying attention. It's telling the central nervous system this is important, and that pushes the neurotransmitter into it. We already talked about willpower, so we're going to call this emotional range. We'll say willpower. And of course, you have I don't want power. And we have HRV. And then this next one, I use the term most of this is fractal, and if you look at the world through the network, through the everything is atoms, you'll see how fractal it is. This one is let's call it difficulty. When making shifts. Now, when I start working with somebody, the idea is we're going to work on purpose. I like to have a proxy or 7, 10x, something bigger than them. And so we're constantly making shifts. And what happens is when you're under stress, you go into protective mode. This is like a fixed mindset. Fight or flight. If you have a person with a phobia, you can see how they start locking down. We talked about the coherence because and people becoming less coherent. The the reason I was hesitating is because to understand this, you're looking at it as a fractal system. When when our cells are threatened by toxins, they go into protective mode. Humans are like a rolled up version of cells, or cells are like a micro version of humans to a degree. This is that point about being fractal. And the internal environment of our body is the external environment of the cell. So the more toxicity we have in our system, the more the cells go into protective mode. That probably makes sense. This is why people get sick, the immune system gets weak, etc. What people don't realize is the cells have two modes. One is going after nutrients, the other one is protective. It can't do both at the same time. It's either in protective mode or it's in growth seeking mode. So when you are putting cells in protective mode for extended periods, you can see why people get ill, because it's not going after the nutrients. The same thing happens with our bodies, and this gets back to when I start doing the executive leadership part of this. The internal environment of an organization is the external environment of the humans in it. And when that internal environment of the organization is toxic, the humans go into protective mode, and then they have less strength, less emotional energy available to them, less emotional range. And when I talk about the step 3 and going into step 3, we want to be priming ourselves with I will prevail. It's like the Stockdale paradox. Yes, this is hard, but I will prevail. When you prime yourself with the I will prevail, and you have the positivity conditioning going on, you don't go into protective mode because you know you can handle anything that comes. Yes, it's hard, but I will prevail. I'll figure it out. This makes it easy to go into difficult situations, to go through trial and error. You don't freak out because a trial didn't work, because you know that you're going to prevail. You know you just found another way that it doesn't work, but you're staying with it. So even in a toxic environment, you can be such that you're not affected by it. This starts to make connection between the mind and the body. When people talk about they have the mental power and they don't get sick, it's that they are so strong, and because 95% of what we do is done by habit, most of our day, our living is in the network of neurons. The stronger your network of neurons are at any given time, the more power you're going to have in that present moment. So it's not mental, it's physiological. Cognitive processing is physiological. When you look at the power of the present moment, I would say that is physiological. It's not mental, although they work together, but you can drive it more with physiology, and that's what I'll be talking about when I get into step 2 of how do you get back to this status quo, this allostasis, right? How do we get back there instantly? And we're going to be using physiological tools to get there. Over time, you want to build that in so it's habitual, so that that is your presence. But if something happens and it knocks you off kilter, we want to have a way to get back. So that's where I'm going to leave it. I'll talk next time. I'll continue on the physiology, but I'm going to talk about how it interacts with the other 4 drivers: beliefs, neuroplasticity, priming, and mindset. We'll see you next time.